Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 293, which goes down this weekend from Sydney in Australia, headlined by a middleweight championship fight between Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland. I don't think it's the strongest pay-per-view, if I'm being honest, but look, we've had a couple of stacked pay-per-views within the last few, so I do think that it's one that's come around where, you know, there's not that much from a name value perspective, but I do expect there to be some fun fights throughout the card. As always, there's going to be some exciting fights for sure. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there's going to be a Base AI recap from our UFC prediction software from last weekend's event at UFC Paris. That'll be on our YouTube channel in a Base AI specific playlist, and you can find that at youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But let's jump right in. Let's get the breakdowns, the predictions going, and we start, of course, with that main event, the headlining fight for the middleweight championship between Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland. Now, look, I feel like a lot of these breakdowns are going to be the same, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. There's a reason Adesanya's like a minus 500, minus 600. I think he might even be higher at some books. Favourite in this fight against Sean Strickland. The one thing I will say is if they do a press conference and, you know, they have both fighters being able to talk at each other, they have done before. Sean Strickland has had a pop at Israel Adesanya, so it kind of makes the build-up good. And again, both fighters can talk. Sean Strickland's really, really funny, you know, when he's not going completely out of his mind. And those hardcore fans will know exactly what I mean when I say that. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is, look, I think the build-up is going to be much better than the fight. And I don't mean any disrespect to Sean Strickland. It's just Israel Adesanya is that good. And Sean Strickland doesn't have the style that is going to be able to cause Israel Adesanya too many problems. And with that style, I talk about the wrestling. You know, I think for Israel Adesanya to lose, apart from obviously outside an Alex Pereira, who is matching, or he's absolutely up there matching Israel Adesanya's striking qualities, unless Adesanya has another fight against another striker who matches the elite striking qualities that he's got. The only way that I see Adesanya getting beaten is by a very strong wrestler who can strike and get into the wrestling and be relentless and constantly take him down. Adesanya's not the easiest fighter to take down, and, you know, he does a better job now than previously in regards to standing back up, so he's not totally liable to get submitted if he is taken down. But Sean Strickland just really isn't this type of fighter. Yes, he can wrestle, yes, he can grapple, but that's not his MO, so to speak. You know, he's a striker predominantly, and he will be in there looking to strike with Adesanya, and he'll be looking to pop his jab out. We all know what Sean Strickland does at this point, you know, in regards to just using striking fundamentals, breaking fighters down with those fundamentals, and ultimately, you know, trying to break the fighter as the fight goes late. And I just don't see it happening with Adesanya. I think Adesanya's the far better striker. He's an elite striker, elusive, creative striker, good movement, good volume, good variety in regards to, yes, he'll use his fundamentals from his boxing, but he'll also use fundamental kicks as well. But then he'll mix in that sharpness that makes him an elite striker in regards to putting combinations together. He'll never really throw the same combination more than once or twice. And yeah, I just think he's going to be too much for Sean Strickland. I think he's going to out-volume Sean Strickland. I think he's got more power than Strickland. I think he's got multiple ways of finishing the fight on the feet, whether it's at range or inside the clinch. And ultimately, I think Sean Strickland is going to have a problem here with Israel Adesanya that is just, or a puzzle and a problem that he's just not going to be able to solve and get past. And like I say, that's no disrespect to Sean Strickland. He's a top fighter. He's in this championship fight for a reason, because he is up there and has been beating some of the best fighters in the division for years now. So he does deserve this title shot. It's just, in my opinion, against a champion that he is going to struggle significantly in the fight. So look, I can't look past Israel Adesanya here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Israel Adesanya to win the fight and still the UFC middleweight champion. And in the next fight, the co-main event, this is more of an interesting fight in my opinion. We've got Tuivasa versus Alexander Volkov. And again, I think we're going to see a striker versus striker. Look, I don't see Tuivasa shooting for any sort of takedowns in this fight. If there is wrestling, it is probably more likely to be on the side of Volkov. But again, I don't anticipate Volkov coming into this fight looking to wrestle. And if the fight does end up in a bit of a wrestling match, again, I just, even saying it out loud, I just don't see it happening. But even if it does become a bit of a wrestling match, I don't think it's going to be enough to make the fight won and lost in regards to the wrestling and the grappling. I think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. And here you've got a complete contrast of two fighters, two strikers. Alexander Volkov is the very tall, very long striker here. Does have power for sure, you can't take that away from him, but he is more of a, touch your opponent up, accumulate volume, and again, break them with that accumulation of volume. Whereas Tuivasa's a wrecking ball inside there. He'll come forwards. He'll look to knock your lights out. We even saw him hurt Ciryl Gane in a big way. But one aspect of Tai Tuivasa's striking that I actually really like is his low kicks. And I think that if he's smart in this fight, I think he'll be able to get at Volkov in moments in this fight. I think that, the long legs of Volkov will be there for Tuivasa to hit. And one aspect of Volkov's game, a lot like Israel Adesanya, obviously, in my opinion, he doesn't do it as great, but that's because Israel Adesanya, in my opinion, is probably the best striker in the UFC. But one thing Volkov does rely on is speed and movement, and yes, he weighs a little bit heavier than what he used to, but the speed and movement advantage is normally there in most of his fights. So if Tai Tuivasa can chop at that lead leg, slow that movement down, and just slow Volkov down to the point where the volume drops a little bit, Tuivasa can move forwards, get inside of his range, I think that's a path to victory for Tuivasa, and we saw him do that against Stefan Struve, who is also, or was also, a very tall, long fighter. And yes, Struve, at the time Tuivasa fought him, wasn't at the level of what Volkov is at right now, but still, Tuivasa's been in there and seen somebody tall, long, and managed to overcome it and, find that knockout. So the other side to this is, one part of what Ciryl Gane did well against Tuivasa was just break Tuivasa at the body, just constantly pepper away at the body, and Volkov's got those really good front teep kicks where he'll just dig his toes into the body of his opponents, and again, that will drain the gas tank a little bit, and that'll wear at Tuivasa a little bit as well. But this fight is 3 rounds, not 5, so again, Volkov would have to get off on that bodywork very early to slow Tuivasa late to find the finish. So in my opinion, it's a very close fight, and I'm struggling to really be confident in a side here. And when I do that, I normally side with the fighter that's the underdog, just because I do think it's a close and competitive fight. So I am going to side with Tuivasa, just finding those low kicks and trying to break Volkov down. And of course, this is a heavyweight fight, so yes, either fighter could knock each other out with one punch, but if there is a one punch knockout, I do expect it to be more on the Tuivasa side. So yeah, close competitive fight, contrasting styles between two strikers, but I'm picking Tai Tuivasa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Manel Kape versus Felipe dos Santos. Now, I really, really hope that nothing happens to this fight, because Manel Kape has been really unlucky over his last few fights that have been matched for him in the UFC, fighters pulling out, injuries, not being able to be cleared by doctors, all that sort of stuff. If it's bad, then it's happened to Kape in the last, sort of few months and few fights. So yeah, I really hope nothing happens to this fight. It'd be good for Kape to get back out there. And unfortunately for Kape, he's not fighting the level of fighter in regards to being ranked that he wanted to fight to make his way up the division for that potential title shot. A win against Felipe dos Santos here isn't going to put him in line for a title shot. He's still going to have to go in there against one of the top fighters in the division, beat them for that title shot. Now, Felipe dos Santos should have been on the Contender Series a couple of weeks ago, so he's a fighter that the UFC have had their eye on and, they like the look of, and he's actually a fun fighter to watch. He's going to do really well in the UFC, he's going to win fights for sure, and he does have an element of a kill or be killed type of fighter where, he will come forward, put a ton of volume on his opponents, he can wrestle, he can grapple, he's, one of these explosive Brazilian fighters, this new era explosive Brazilian fighter that I've been speaking about for a few months now. And like I say, for as good as he is offensively, he can be hit as well. And like I say, he goes to war in there. But I just don't think that Manel Kape is, the type of fighter to allow himself to be on the receiving end of a war. And because of that, I think Dos Santos is going to be overexerting himself, maybe putting it on Kape a little bit too much, a little bit recklessly, not being too defensively aware. And I think Kape's going to be able to pick his shots. I think Dos Santos is going to start really exciting. Everyone's going to get really excited. But I think as soon as Kape settles into this fight, I think he's going to look really good. He's going to pick his shots. I don't see him getting taken down, and if he does get taken down, his jiu-jitsu's good enough to get back up anyway. And I just feel that, like I say, as much as I love Felipe Dos Santos as a fighter, he's going to be a fan favourite. He's exciting. He's definitely going to win fights in the UFC. I just feel that Kape is definitely just too much too soon for Dos Santos, and I get why he's taken the fight. Initially, he was going to have to fight for a contract in the UFC. The UFC will have rewarded him with a contract for taking this fight, so it completely makes sense for Dos Santos. And if for whatever reason Dos Santos comes out here and beats Kape, then man, that throws him right up there into the division. So it's a no-lose situation for Felipe Dos Santos, but like I say, I think it's too much too soon. I think Kape is too good, too technical, very good defensively, a good counter-striker, but can also put it on his opponent as well, and he's got power, and I think that power is going to find its way through at some point in this fight. So I'm picking Manel Kape to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a rematch from a month or so ago. We've got Justin Tafa versus Austen Lane. Now, when they last fought, I think the fight ended within 30 seconds. It was an accidental eye poke from Austen Lane on Justin Tafa. Justin Tafa couldn't continue. So we got to see 30 seconds of this, but I don't think it's enough to really be able to say, oh, okay, well, we've seen how this fight plays out more often than not, and this is going to be the result. Now, the one thing I will say is, I believe, if I remember rightly, I picked Justin Tafa last time to win the fight. And Austen Lane, from that brief under 30 seconds that we saw, we've seen that he doesn't have too much concern or hesitancy with Tafa. And he was looking okay with his movement and gauging his range. And he looked comfortable in there, is what I'm going to say. I'm not saying he looked great, but he looked like a comfortable fighter making his UFC debut in the heavyweight division. So I think Lane is not going to be one of these fighters that is going to crumble under the pressure. Technically, it's not his UFC debut anymore, so he's been through the fight week, he's been through the motions, he's stepped inside the cage. It was just unfortunate how the fight ended. But I still can't look past Justin Tafa in this fight. I think Austen Lane's going to do decent work. I think he's going to be the better mover. I think he might even be a little bit faster. But at some point, he's going to have to get into range to exchange with Justin Tafa. And that's where the Tafa brothers are just so good, so lethal, deadly, powerful. And I think that Austen Lane will be doing okay. He'll look like he's competing perfectly fine until the moment where he's not okay and not competing anymore. I think that Justin Tafa, again, I'm not sure if this goes to a decision that Justin Tafa wins more often than not. However, like I said, at some point in this fight, both fighters are going to have to exchange punches, and I think Tafa is just a naturally more powerful and more skilled striker and kickboxer in this fight. So yeah, I think at some point they're going to exchange. I think at some point Tafa's going to be able to land on Austen Lane. I'm just not sure that Austen Lane's going to be able to take the power that Tafa delivers. So for those reasons, I'm picking Justin Tafa to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting one. We've got Tyson Pedro versus Anton Turkalj. Now, it's a fight where both fighters are going to have to be really careful here. Now, I'm not saying that whoever loses this fight is going to get cut from the UFC, but they're probably going to be in and around that. Like, both fighters aren't really looking too great at the minute, if I'm being honest. Like, Tyson Pedro, since, the injuries and the surgeries, he's came back, he's 2-1 in the UFC. He beat Ike Villanueva, he beat Harry Hunsucker, finished both of them in the first round, and then dropped a decision to Modestas Bukauskas. Now, the Ike Villanueva and Harry Hunsucker fight, sure, they were, gimme fights, and I don't mean any disrespect to Tyson Pedro. It's just Tyson Pedro was levels above them. But he did what he was supposed to do and finished them in round one. And that, like I said, that's exactly what he did, and you can't fault Tyson Pedro for that. But then it's the Modestas Bukauskas fight that raises the question marks, because when Tyson Pedro came into the UFC, everybody expected him to do really well and, demolish fighters and opponents, and he had a lot of hype on him. This is a fighter that's been a -300 and a -400 favourite in the UFC. And, he fell off the boil a little bit, took a couple of losses, and like I said, he had that time off, and then he came back. So again, after seeing the first two finishes after he came back, the hype started a little bit more again. But then, like I say, he dropped that fight to Bukauskas over 3 rounds. Now, he didn't look terrible in that fight, but Modestas Bukauskas, compare him to the hype that's on Tyson Pedro and what people expected. Tyson Pedro should have been beating Bukauskas. Now, Bukauskas is a decent fighter. I don't think he's a fighter that's ever going to hit the top 10 or maybe even the top 15, I don't know. But I don't think he's going to ever be a mid to high ranked fighter. But he's a good UFC caliber fighter. So there's no shame in losing. It's just, I think people expected Pedro to go in there and really put it on Bukauskas, and he didn't, and like I say, he dropped a decision. Then we move over to Anton Turkalj outside the UFC. This guy's looking great. He comes into the UFC. Now, it's hard to be too negative on Turkalj in regards to who he's fought. He's 0-2 in the UFC, lost his UFC debut to Jailton Almeida, who, are not a lot of people are putting their hands up and, putting the signatures on a piece of paper to fight Jailton Almeida. Turkalj did. I don't think you can really say anything negative about that. Jailton Almeida is an absolute beast, and Turkalj was never going to win that fight. Then you look at the next fight after that. He goes again in there against Vita Petrino. Now, at the time, this was an evenly matched fight. Vita Petrino has actually shown that he's got, again, that aggressive Brazilian nature, but now he's mixing in wrestling and grappling, and we've seen him look good after the Turkalj fight. So, again, how much stock do you put into that? I'm not too sure. But the thing is with Turkalj, you actually have got to go back and watch that Petrino fight. Sure, Petrino's good, but in the moments that Turkalj had in that fight, and Petrino did tire as well, by the way, Turkalj had opportunities to really show that he's a fighter with that good cardio and being able to take advantage of really bad situations that the opponents have fell into. So like I say, when Petrino was tired and he was a little bit laboured, you expected Turkalj to really come on strong, and I just don't see anything from Turkalj that really excites me. So I'm intrigued to see how he fights against Tyson Pedro, because this is absolutely a fight that if Turkalj wants to show that he's a UFC caliber fighter, he has to be beating Tyson Pedro. And on Pedro's side, he's a fighter that has to come in here and beat Turkalj to re-engage in regards to being a UFC caliber fighter and fans knowing that he's got quality about him. So it's really interesting, especially from a betting perspective as well, because Pedro opened up a moderate favourite. Now it's down at a pick'em. The line's flipping at some bookies as well, putting Tyson Pedro as the underdog. So money's come in on Turkalj. But in regards to how both fighters match up, I think they match up quite evenly. I think that both of them are good strikers. I think Pedro's probably got the better quality of striking and more power. I think if a fighter's more likely to wrestle and grapple, that's more likely to be Turkalj. But we saw against Bukauskas that Tyson Pedro can wrestle, and he's always shown that he's got a decent grappling ability. So within the wrestling and grappling between both fighters, again, I think it's quite close. What I do like about Pedro is, and this hasn't happened just for this fight, I think it was from the Bukauskas fight that he started training at City Kickboxing, and he's been getting that real good quality, high level training that we see Israel Adesanya have, that we see Carlos Ulberg have, which we'll be breaking down soon. And even those two fighters are really good training partners for Tyson Pedro. And both of them have been in camp because they're both fighting on this card. So Tyson Pedro's had two really good quality bodies that have been going hard in the gym. And that's what's leaning me towards Tyson Pedro here, because like I said, from a skill set and style perspective, both fighters are really close. The fight should be competitive, but the fact that Pedro should be making those developments at a gym like City Kickboxing with high level training partners, that's what leans me towards Pedro here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tyson Pedro to win this fight. And in the next fight, I've just mentioned his name, from City Kickboxing, we've got Carlos Ulberg versus Da Un Jung. And in this fight, again, I've said it a few times in the podcast already, I expect this fight to be a striker versus striker. If there is any wrestling, maybe it's more likely to come from Jung. We've seen him wrestle before, but I don't think his wrestling is good enough to really be able to, A, be effective against Ulberg and keep him down. and take him down consistently, and B, because of that, I don't see it having that much of a factor on how the fight ends with the winner and the loser, whether it be a finish or whether it go to the scorecards. I think the fight's going to be won and lost within the striking element. And I just can't look past Carlos Ulberg. I actually think Ulberg's a really good fighter. I think he puts it together really well. He's relaxed. You can see the quality of a striker that he is. He does have to mind his P's and Q's because Darren Jung can crack. He's got power. We've seen him hit one-punch knockouts before. But I think Ulberg's striking quality, especially from a defensive perspective, is going to allow him to really flourish in this fight. So yes, I think Darren Jung will land on him. Of course he will. It's a fist fight, and it's very rare that you get a fight that one fighter doesn't land a single punch. So I do think Darren Jung will do some work in this fight. It's just the quality of striker that Ulberg is, I think, is going to get him the win in this fight. And even if Ulberg's super patient, Darren Jung's trying to take control of the fight, coming on strong, and Ulberg's not really there to be hit, I think Darren Jung at that point might get a little bit, he might start overexerting himself and trying to be overly aggressive to overcompensate the fact that he's not being able to really land what he wants to land on Ulberg. And in return, I think Ulberg's going to be able to counter well. Once he hits Darren Jung with a good counter, I think Jung will reset, be a little bit hesitant with the power that Ulberg possesses, along with the striking acumen and the accuracy that Ulberg provides as well. And from then, I just think Ulberg's going to be able to land his shots and find that punch that knocks Darren Jung out. For me, Darren Jung has got to go in here and approach this fight like he did with William Knight and try and take Ulberg down. But I just don't think he's going to have that same success against Ulberg as he did have against William Knight. So yeah, I think Ulberg's in a really good fight here. I'm picking Carlos Ulberg to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an explosive one, or should be explosive. We've got two fighters making relatively quick turnarounds from their last fights. We've got Jack Jenkins versus Chepe Mariscal. And like I said, this fight has got fireworks written all over it. I think it's going to be a true mixed martial arts fight. I think we're going to see good striking, wrestling, grappling from both sides, offensively and defensively. I just think it's a really, really good fight. One difference I can see, though, is I feel like Jack Jenkins is taking a step down in competition from his last fight, whereas Mariscal is absolutely taking a step up in competition, and probably fighting Jenkins at this point in Jenkins's career might be the hardest opponent that he's ever fought. So yeah, it's a good fight. Both fighters, like I say, fighting very different opponents from last time out now. Jack Jenkins coming off that win against Jamal Emmers. A lot of people calling that fight a robbery. And look, personally, I thought that Jamal Emmers won the fight. I actually bet Jack Jenkins as an underdog, and I was kind of expecting that decision to go to Emmers, but the rounds were close apart from that last round. And, in close rounds, fights can get scored either way. And we know what the judges are like. They're not the greatest judges, but I definitely don't think it was a robbery. But I do think that Jenkins should have took the L, if that makes sense. Whereas Chepe Mariscal, he's coming off that absolute war that I've got absolutely no idea how him and Trevor Peek did not get a performance bonus for that fight, because they went to war for the promotion. They went to war for the UFC, and they should have been rewarded for it. But yeah, definitely two contrasting fights. Now, the one worry for Chepe Mariscal is, although he did not comfortably, but although he did clearly beat Trevor Peek, the fact that he went to a decision and went to war with Trevor Peek and couldn't really get him out of there, and had a lot of moments to get him out of there, that's worrying. Chepe Mariscal will have watched that fight back and been disappointed that he couldn't get Trevor Peek out of there. And now he's fighting Jack Jenkins, who is, levels and levels above where Trevor Peek's at in regards to everywhere. The striking, the wrestling, the grappling, defensively and offensively in all those three areas as well. So if Chepe Mariscal couldn't get Trevor Peek out of there, how likely is he to, finish Jack Jenkins? I think it's very slim. And when we're looking at style versus style here, I think from a striking perspective, Mariscal's more of the dog in there. He's not as technical, but he'll come forwards hard, aggressive, and he'll look to try and really overwhelm his opponents. When he can't overwhelm his opponents and they push him backwards, he's not quite the same fighter. And I think that's where he's going to get a little bit unstuck with the striking here, because Jack Jenkins has got good accuracy, he's got good striking defense. He doesn't waste strikes, but when he does strike, he puts combinations together. He'll mix in low kicks, which, by the way, those low kicks, he's broken the leg of multiple opponents with those low kicks. And even against Jamal Emmers, what was interesting is Emmers actually landed a few hard low kicks on Jenkins, and we saw Jenkins being able to take those low kicks as well. And Chepe Mariscal likes a hard low kick. So what I'm trying to say here is, look, Jenkins has got the ability to break his opponent's legs, and he's also got the durability on his lead leg as well. So the leg kick battle, in my opinion, goes to Jenkins. Then when we look at the wrestling and grappling, look, Jenkins can wrestle, he can definitely grapple. Emmers, yes, he did take him down and keep him down at some points in their fight, but Jamal Emmers has got a wrestling background, solid wrestler, doesn't use it as much as he should. Mariscal doesn't have that level of wrestling. But if Mariscal does take Jenkins down, look, Mariscal took Peak down, and Peak was able to stand back up to his feet. Trevor Peak, again, no disrespect, this dude is the epitome of a technical brawler, street fighter type of style. So if he's getting up, then I expect Jenkins to. And look, the more and more you break this fight down, I just kind of feel that Jenkins holds a lot of advantages here. Again, both offensively and defensively. I think Mariscal will have his moments for sure. I think Jenkins has absolutely got to mind his P's and Q's because of the aggression and power that Chepe Mariscal brings in the cage. But I just think Jenkins has got the qualities to be able to methodically break Mariscal down, push him on the back foot, chop away at that lead leg, mix in the wrestling if he needs to. And yeah, I think it's a really good fight for Jenkins because he's going to get tested. He's going to get invited into a brawl. And if he does, then he's going to give Mariscal every chance for Mariscal to win the fight. But look, like I said, I think the quality that Jack Jenkins brings to the table and the fact he's taken a step down in competition, in my opinion, I like Jenkins in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jack Jenkins to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jamie Mullarkey versus the legend John Makdessi. And I say legend because this dude has been a staple in the UFC for years and years and years. Doesn't seem to age. Doesn't seem to be declining too much, at least. He's still got good qualities about him. And look, Jamie Mullarkey is a good fighter and a tough fighter for pretty much any fighter to fight in and around the UFC at this level. So the fact that John Makdessi has been matched against Mullarkey tells you that Makdessi is a fighter that's still got some qualities about him. It's just, in this fight against Mullarkey, I kind of think that Makdessi is going to get overwhelmed a little bit. Like, Makdessi really likes his own space and likes to be able to pick his shots and dictate the range and dictate that pace and just being able to fight a fight that he really wants. And I know that's a cliche because every fighter wants to fight their fight, but Makdessi really seems to thrive on his timing and his shots and his accuracy when he's the one dictating the pace and the range. And Jamie Mullarkey just isn't going to give John Makdessi that, in my opinion. I think Mullarkey is going to be able to push forward. If it means eating a punch from Makdessi to land a couple of punches or a combination himself, then Mullarkey will do that. He's got that dog in him, he's got that durability, and although he has been fighting a lot smarter lately and really sitting back on his technical game, if he needs to make this fight ugly and dog-like, then he's going to be able to do that. And I think that's where he's going to be able to get at John Makdessi. Now, you can't take anything for granted. John Makdessi can land that punch. He is accurate, he still has power. These are 4-ounce gloves, and he's still a UFC quality fighter. So again, like I just said with Jack Jenkins, Mullarkey's got to manage his P's and Q's in this fight, but this is a fight that he should win, in my opinion. I think he's going to be able to match the technical qualities that Makdessi's got on the feet striking. I think that he can make this fight ugly if he needs to. I think he's going to be the bigger, stronger, more physical fighter in the cage as well. When it comes to the wrestling, it remains a question to be seen. John Makdessi is a little bit like Sam Alvey was in regards to just having this godlike takedown defense, like Brad Tavares as well. Like, Makdessi is very, very tough to take down. So remains to be seen if Mullarkey can get his wrestling going. But if any fighter is more likely to engage in the wrestling and grappling, then it's more likely to be Jamie Mullarkey. So I think that Mullarkey's got a couple of paths to victory, but at this point I think he's going to be too aggressive, too physical, and he's just going to land more on Makdessi. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jamie Mullarkey to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nasrat Haqparast versus a newcomer, debut fighter, Landon Quinones. Now, Landon Quinones, just fresh coming off of the Ultimate Fighter. I think he was one of Team McGregor's prospect fighters. He went in there against Jason Knight, took him down, got triangled. Look, I don't really get this fight, if I'm being honest. Like, Haqparast has been matched against other really good fighters. Like, he was also matched against Jamie Mullarkey. There was a couple of other fighters he was matched against. So I don't know whether it's just fights not really being able to materialise for Haqparast, but now he's ready to go. All the UFC could find is Landon Quinones. And again, I don't mean this disrespectfully. I never ever do when I'm breaking fights down, but yeah, it's a very, very strange fight because Nasrat Haqparast, like I said, not only has he been matched against better fighters, but he's beaten and finished multiple better fighters in the UFC. So, look, anything can happen in this game. This is MMA. This is the UFC. I say it all the time. 4-ounce gloves at this level. All it takes is one mistake, one punch, and aside from that puncher's chance, I just don't see Landon Quinones beating Nasrat Haqparast. Like, I think Landon Quinones is more of a striker. Sure, he trusts his wrestling and his grappling. He trusted it enough to take Jason Knight down and take the fight into Knight's will. But then we saw exactly what happened. Like, Nasrat Haqparast is not the easiest fighter to take down. He's got good anti-wrestling. He can wrestle himself. He's got good grappling. He's been in there and competed and done well against other good grapplers, probably better grapplers than Landon Quinones. So, for me, the fight's going to come down to the striking. And again, Haqparast hits hard, he's fast, he's got good movement, he's got more experience at this level, fought the higher level of competition, beaten the higher level of competition, and his hand speed is insane. I just don't think that Quinones is going to really be able to establish or get himself going in this fight enough to be able to start outlanding Haqparast, take rounds from Haqparast. I just really don't see it. I think the way Landon Quinones wins this fight is if they get into a crazy exchange and Quinones just lands that one punch and knocks him out. But again, even at that, it'd be really surprising to see. So yeah, look, I think it's a difficult fight for Quinones. One thing that I will say, and I said the same for Felipe dos Santos against Manel Kape as well, and I'll always say this about these debut fighters taking these high-level fights, is I'm just really happy they've got a UFC contract, because the UFC signs fighters to multi-fight deals as soon as they step in the UFC. So Quinones will get his opportunity, and that's probably why he's taken this fight. Look, he didn't win the Ultimate Fighter. The UFC have given him an opportunity to get a contract, and he just got to step in there and, be that body for Haqparast to fight. So yeah, really happy for Landon Quinones. Hopefully, we'll see him in more competitive fights after this, but in regards to this fight, I'm picking Nasrat Haqparast to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Blood Diamond versus the newcomer Charlie Radtke. And yeah, look, Blood Diamond's got to prove himself. Like, he's 0-2 in the UFC. I mean, the first one against Jeremiah Wells, you can't really penalise him too much for that. Jeremiah Wells is a beast, and Blood Diamond is more of a striker. Again, has trained with like Israel Adesanya, so he's got that kickboxing acumen. Actually, outside of the UFC, he looked a bit more of a wrestler and a grappler, if I'm being honest. But he has, his background is within the striking, and he has looked like the striker, especially last time out against Kosi, where Kosi was the wrestler and grappler. And actually, Blood Diamond did some okay work in that fight, but ultimately it was his inability to be able to defend a takedown and then get back up once he's taken down that cost him that fight. Now, with Charlie Radtke, actually, Radtke's a decent fighter. When you watch him fight, he's very well-rounded. He's very big for the division as well. So he's going to be physical. He's going to have some muscle mass. And like I say, he's predominantly a striker himself with power. And he does have that lead power as well, so he can knock you out with a check left hook from the lead hand. Like, he's got genuine power. I think Blood Diamond maybe mixes things up a little bit better in regards to varying his attacks with the kicks and mixing it in with the kickboxing, the Thai, the boxing, just all together, just mixing the striking up quite well. And he probably moves a little bit better if I'm, really critiquing this fight down to the fine bones. But Charlie Radtke, in my opinion, is going to have a wrestling and grappling advantage. But this is where it gets interesting, because Radtke, his best attribute as a fighter, in my opinion, is his striking. So he's going to have to, in my opinion, to give himself the best chance of winning this fight, Radtke's going to have to ignore where he's strongest and go to where he's not as strong, because that's where Blood Diamond has got serious holes in his game. But the thing is, I think Radtke can do that. We've seen him in the regional scene wrestle and grapple. Do I think he's got the ability to take Blood Diamond down? Yes. Do I think he's going to be able to keep Blood Diamond down if he takes him down? Yes. Until I'm seeing these rapid developments in the wrestling and grappling from Blood Diamond, these are always going to be, it's always going to be the analysis that I come back with. And like I say, until I see it, look, if Charlie Radtke comes in this fight, tries to take Blood Diamond down, can't take him down, and Blood Diamond stands back up, if he is taken down straight away, and keeps this fight on the feet and makes this a kickboxing fight, then I'll have more confidence the next time I break a Blood Diamond fight down that he can be able to defend takedowns and stand back up if he is taken down. But I just haven't seen that yet, and I think Radtke's got the ability to do that. But that's Radtke's secondary path to victory. His first path to victory, in my opinion, is to strike, because that's where he's strongest. Try and knock Blood Diamond down or knock him out. But the thing is, Blood Diamond is a good striker himself, so Radtke is making the fight more competitive by fighting where he's strongest, and that's what makes it interesting. Regardless, until I see those holes fixed from Blood Diamond's wrestling and grappling, when he's fighting a fighter who can wrestle and grapple relatively well, I'm going to be picking against him. So for those reasons, I'm picking Charlie Radtke to win this fight. And in the next fight, it's a well-matched fight. We've got Shane Jung versus Gabriel Fly Miranda. Now, this does seem to be the last chance saloon, so to speak, for Shane Jung. And look, again, there's no disrespect, and I hate to say it, but, you know, he's on a 3-fight losing streak in the UFC. He hasn't really looked great in a long time fighting Shane Jung. So the losses to Ludovic Klein, Omar Morales, last time out against Blake Bilder, I think if he loses this fight to Miranda, it might be the last time that we see Shane Jung in the UFC. So, yeah, look, Jung's back is against the wall. He's got to win this fight, in my opinion. So, Gabriel Miranda, is he going to be the fighter that is able to, you know, take Shane Jung to 0-4? And there's a possibility of that. Like I said, it's a well-matched fight. It's going to be competitive. Shane Jung, the one thing that we've seen from Gabriel Miranda is that he can get clocked a little bit. You know, defensively, he can get hit a little bit more than what you'd like, and he can get dropped and hurt. But the thing is, Miranda's actually got decent recoverability, and he can actually get back up to his feet and continue to fight competitively. Now, the one thing that I said when I bet Blake Bilder against Shane Jung, because I took Bilder as an underdog in that fight, and the one thing that really concerned me was Bilder's durability and the fact that he's hittable. And Shane Jung wasn't able to even drop him and hurt him like other fighters have outside of the UFC. So even if you want to make the same case for Gabriel Miranda here, that, you know, he's a little bit hittable and he can be hurt and got at, well, so could Blake Bilder. So if Shane Jung hasn't done that to Bilder, is he likely to do it against Miranda? It's just, like I say, I don't think Shane Jung packs too much power in the punches to be able to cause fighters real problems. But the one thing that he does have here is a striking advantage, but I do think it's minimal. And the thing is, Gabriel Miranda, he's coming off that loss to Benoit Saint-Denis, and my God, has that loss aged beautifully for Gabriel Miranda, because we've seen how much of a beast Benoit Saint-Denis is. And to be honest with you, Miranda was actually competitive somewhat in that fight. Like, he was landing shots back on Benoit Saint-Denis, he was shooting takedowns on him, and like I say, Miranda didn't give a bad fight against one fighter who is now wiping through a lot of the fighters in the division, and, you know, a fighter that a lot of people are keeping an eye on now. So if that's the same Gabriel Miranda that we see against Shane Jung, then yeah, I think Miranda wins the fight. Like, Miranda's a legit BJJ black belt. Apparently he was training at, I think it was MMA Masters, and because he was submitting everybody at MMA Masters, they put him as a coach on the jiu-jitsu program. So this dude is legit on the mat, and he can strike to an extent, and he's got some good control in the clinch as well. It's just, like I say, the only real flaw in Miranda's game at this level is the fact he can be hittable, and if Shane Jung does land something clean or lands a clean combination, then it could be the beginning of the end if he hurts Miranda. But like I said, I expected Jung to be able to hurt Bilder at parts in that fight, because what we saw from Blake Bilder previously is he gets hurt early and then comes back and wins. I thought that's exactly how this fight's going to go. Shane Jung's going to hurt him, drop him, not going to be able to finish him, and then Bilder comes back and, you know, wins the fight. But look, Bilder didn't even get hurt or dropped in that fight. So yeah, and Bilder also did a good job in that fight of actually scoring a takedown and winning a round with top control. So if he's able to do that, Miranda's quality is going to be there as well. Like, I think it's a difficult fight for Jung. Would I be shocked to see Jung come in there and knock Miranda out? No, because of all the reasons I've explained. But I just don't see it happening. I think Miranda's going to be able to shoot takedowns. I don't think he's going to be successful with every one of them. I think it's going to make a close, dirty, ugly fight. But when you're looking at the rounds and who's maybe, just slowing the fight down and breaking up the play, I think it's more likely to be Miranda. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gabriel Miranda to win this fight. And in the final breakdown, the final fight of the podcast, we've got two newcomers. And this is a bit of a left field fight, one that, I don't think anyone really saw coming. We've got Kevin Jousset versus Kiefer Crosbie. Now, like I say, two debutants. I didn't even know either of these fighters was on the UFC radar. So when this fight got matched, I was really, really surprised. Now, let's start with Kiefer Crosbie. Trains out of SGB Ireland. So, he's got decent bodies to work with over there. His style, very aggressive, loves to be the aggressor. He's definitely more of a better hammer than he is a nail. So when he's the one dictating the fight and, got his feet down, comfortable, his reads there, and starts being able to let his hands go, he can be a real problem. And we actually just saw him demolish Alex Cowboy Oliveira, who was just being released by the UFC. So Kiefer Crosbie, when he is on his game and aggressive, he can be a problem. But the thing is, he can also be got at. He can also be hit. And like I say, he's not that great of a nail. So once he starts getting hit, he can shell up a little bit. He can go too defensive, and then his opponents can come forward. So he really is a bit of a chalk and cheese fighter. You're either going to get a good version of Crosbie or the complete opposite, and he's going to get rolled over. Now with Kevin Jousset, looks like the bigger fighter in this fight, more filled out. I think from a striking perspective, he can get at Crosbie, but again, if Crosbie turns it on and is able to get his reads on Jousset and put Jousset on the back foot, then that's going to cause problems. But I do think that Jousset's quality of striking is better than Crosbie's. And when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, look, Crosbie can look for takedowns. I don't think his wrestling's outstanding, and Jousset can defend takedowns. There was a fight recently where he was against a fighter that all he did was try and take him down. So his wrestling defense is there fundamentally, at least. And Jousset can score takedowns himself. So yeah, look, it's going to be a competitive fight in my opinion. And like I say, if Kiefer Crosbie is on his game, then he wins the fight. But if he's not, then he absolutely loses the fight. So with that in mind, I have to sort of look at which fighter's more trustworthy, more consistent. And that fighter for me is Jousset. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kevin Jousset to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in as always. And again, as always, I do try and get back to the comments left on our YouTube channel. I appreciate all the subscriptions to the channel as well. If you are listening on one of the podcast platforms, so Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, all that good stuff, if you do want to come over to the YouTube channel, drop a subscription, maybe comment on the podcast, tell me where you disagree with my picks, tell me who you're betting on, then you're absolutely more than welcome to. And I do encourage that as well because it helps the channel. So yeah, I'll always try and get back to all the replies on the YouTube channel. I always appreciate the really nice comments as well that people do drop in there. So again, that never goes unnoticed and unappreciated. So as always, thank you for listening. I'm Newsome, and I'll see you again next week.